Oz, thank you for joining the Solar Tea Show. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
for taking time out of your day.
Yep. Thank you for having me on. I'm excited about this. Yep.
So to start off,
Yeah.
can you tell us about your childhood, like growing up? What was that like for you?
Growing up, let's see. I grew up. The country is called Democratic Republic of Congo. I'm actually from there. I was born in the capital, Kinshasa. I speak French and another language from there. And I tell people all the time, I am not the average person from my country because my father studied in America. He went back home and started his own business, did pretty well. So we were in the 1%. We went to private schools and things like that. So I can't really relate to what a lot of people went through, but that was my experience growing up, going to a French school, then eventually going to an American school where I started learning English. So, yep. And then eventually migrated to America. I was about 15 years old. So, yep.
And was that common for like kids in the country where you're from?
Not
Where,
at
like,
all.
their
Not at
parents
all.
go to the U.S. and then come back and then...
Not at all. No, he was a really smart man. He got a scholarship and he went to Columbia University, New York University. He got a PhD in chemical engineering. And so that was not common. But, I think his time in America, he had this vision of wanting us to learn English because he always knew that if we learned English, it could take us, to many places around the world. And that's why, sometimes they give us Americans a hard time and say, hey, why don't you learn another language? Well, when you speak English, you can go anywhere, but no, that was not common at all. Yeah, we were really, I always say, I'm very grateful and fortunate that my father worked hard, to make sure that we had a great future.
And what was that like going from the Congo to the United States at such a young age?
It's interesting. We had an exchange student from Italy, my stepdaughter, who went to journalism school with you. And folks used to ask her like all the time, hey, you miss home? Do you miss Italy? She was from Italy. And, she was like, no, I'm excited. And so for me, I remember that experience. I was 15 years old. I'm a big Michael Jordan fan. I had the first pair of Air Jordans. I don't know why I gave them up. Till this day, I regret it. But to come to America was always a dream, I learned how to skateboard and Bermuda shorts. I mean, just the culture was totally different. And, it's a one country where everybody around the world wants to one day come over here. So I was excited. I mean, you miss your parents, you miss home and all that, but you're in America, they have 50 different ice cream flavors and things of that you've never seen. It's like, it was just really, really, really exciting. I still have memories, you guys, your generation, you're luckier because you have Instagram. Like our exchange student, she documented everything through Instagram. Mm-hmm. So she can look back and see all those photos. But some of the memories are fading away as I get older. I'm not as young as you used to be, but we're still trying to remember some of those memories. So.
And you said your father was an entrepreneur.
Yes.
And I know you went down that path, but when you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up? Did you also want to start a business, or were you thinking something else?
I did not have a choice. The man, you're trying to be a kid. And, I remember till this day, 11 years old, your father always asking you, what are you going to be when you grow up? And I've done the same thing with my daughters. It's, I wanted, really the truth is I wanted to be like a movie star, an athlete. I played basketball back at the American school in my country. And I wanted to come to America and play basketball and make a lot of money. And once I moved to America and I realized that some of these guys were a lot taller than me, I was like, I better figure out another plan. But I think seeing the freedom and flexibility he had as an entrepreneur is really one of the reasons why that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do the same thing. Actually, when I came to America, I was supposed to spend time at college, get a degree, and then head back to our country and run the business. Unfortunately, father's business started struggling financially, and then he had to restart. So we had to find a plan in America. We were kind of like here in America, and we had to figure it out. So,
and going to like high school and like college here, how was that for you? Do you think that like with the whole culture change and everything?
Big culture shock, big culture shock.
Do you think you went into it smoothly, or was there like things you had to figure out by yourself?
I think I went to it smoothly. People always ask me, how did I end up in Kansas? Good friend of mine. We were friends at the American school in my country, and then when they moved back to America, they were missionaries in my country of origin for like 20 plus years, And so when they moved back to the States. They wanted me to join them in a small town called Newton, Kansas. And most people from my part of the world, when they come to America, they go to New York, Baltimore, all those great cities. But you end up in Newton, Kansas, small town by Wichita, Kansas. It's a big culture shock because I had friends from every part of the world where I went to school. So I had friends from the country of India. I had friends from Italy. My best friends, the brothers that were from Italy, I learned about the Italian culture through them. I had a friend from England. I learned all about all genres of music through my friend from England. I mean, folks like U2 and Guns N' Roses, things that I would have never picked up on if I did not have friends from all over the world. So it was a blend of friends. It was like the UN, the United Nations. But then you get to Newton, Kansas, it's totally different, So you have to adjust with that, And I think, you grow up in an environment where there's not much, and you come to a country where there's so much. You slowly adapt. You slowly get used to it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
So going from there, what got you into the U.S. Army?
What got me into the U.S. Army? Two reasons, really. I'm a Jayhawk like yourself, rock chalk. And I was in one of my economics class, and I remember the teacher saying 96% of Americans will never be able to retire. And I was probably 20, 21, something like that, but I can't remember exactly. But that kind of registered in my head, thinking, okay, well, most people won't be able to retire in this country. And so I also had a friend, his name is Alan. I won't mention his last name, but a good friend of mine. And we were trying to figure out life. I was working, my first job in America was at the Alumni in the kitchen there. I was a dishwasher. It's my first job in America. So I'm always, it's exciting when I think about that, going way back, even though I'm about to be 53 this weekend, but I still feel like I'm your age, like I'm around 24, 25. But we were trying to figure out life. And then he had a friend who he wanted me to see and visit. So we go to his friend's place, and I asked him, well, hey, what do you do? And he says, nothing. I said, what do you mean you don't do anything? He said, well, I was in the Marines for 20 years, and I retired, and I got a pension, so I have the option not to work. And I remember thinking, I'm going to do that. That's the reason why I joined, really. I mean, I joined the Army because I knew that most people would not be able to retire, and I knew that if I spent 20 years, I'd get a pension. But number two also was I wanted to see the world. I wanted to be sent to Germany so I could buy a BMW. That didn't happen. I ended up in Kentucky. So, but that's really the main reason I joined the military. So,
you wanted financial freedom.
Financial freedom was what I wanted, because I knew that you had to commit those 20 years, and then you would have a paycheck for life. And I did 23, and so as long as my heart beats, I get a paycheck for the rest of my life. So I'm, really grateful. It was not easy, deployments and things of that, time away from the family. But, when you look back, it's what I wanted. And I had that vision that one day I would be able to have the options to do other things. And so here we are at a podcast, you're interviewing me. So.
And what was the U.S. Army like for you? Because I know you were a finance officer.
Yes.
Was that one of the main reasons you also got into it?
Yes, it was. Because, my background, economics, degree from the University of Kansas. And then while I was in the Army, I came in, I was not a U.S. citizen, so I had to be a soldier, a specialist, a sergeant. Some of your viewers may not know the ranks, but then, I was a supply sergeant, logistics. Most civilians would understand that as logistics. But I always wanted to be an officer and then eventually become a finance officer, because I've always liked the topic of money. And so once I became a finance officer, once I had to be naturalized, become a U.S. citizen, and then became a finance officer. I was excited about that, but I had to be an artillery officer first. Artillery, to some of your listeners who may not know, basically, we blow up targets that we don't see downrange. Tankers, you have to see the target and you blow them up. But I was not too excited about that, because my thing was like, when I get out of the Army, what kind of job am I going to do? So, and I had a colonel who actually helped me move on to the branch of finance, because the artillery branch would not release me to go to finance. And I always wanted to go into finance because that's what I wanted to do. It's business, money, anything that dealt with money was always something that I was very passionate about. And eventually got to do that for about 16 years as a finance officer in the Army. So.
And what was it like when you're getting deployed? Are you actually seeing the battlefield, or are you just staying on the base where you're at?
So 2003, that was first deployment. We're actually in Kuwait. I remember a friend of mine asking, "Do you think we're going to go to war?" And I remember thinking, I don't think the president of the United States has 150,000 troops in Kuwait just for show. I said, "Yes, we are." And so, first deployment, you have no idea. I still have a diary that I've never written a diary in my life, but that was the first time actually writing a diary about my experience because, you watch movies like Platoon, and I remember telling one of my friends, hey, we're going to be burning poop, in the movie Platoon, they do that. And he's like, no, we're not. Well, I've done that. I've been on the most dangerous roads. I've been, I was on a convoy. Basically, a convoy is when you go out there's typically four vehicles. You're going out there on missions and all that. And I was doing that about 5 days a week. So in the beginning, once we had taken over, the United States was in Iraq, things kind of slowed down for a little bit. But then the insurgents started attacking us, blowing us up and all that. And that's when things really got real. We look at the conflict every time you get in, you blow everything up. But then once the insurgents start going after you, that's when you really see how dangerous it can be. So it's really, we have the 25th anniversary of September 11 coming up, and it's really, there's a lot of soldiers out there who sacrificed their lives, and I'm just grateful that I was not one of those casualties because I could have been one of those casualties. But every day you wake up, you smile, and people sometimes wonder, what are you excited about? Well, life, Life is short. It's you're 24 years old, I think you told me. Yeah, it just happens fast, and before you know it, you're about to be 53. I still feel young. I still feel your age. Still work out and all that. But it just flashes by. So I always tell people, just enjoy every moment you have on this planet. Just be grateful. I think be grateful for what you have. Some of us wake up, have plenty of money, and you still see people who have a lot of money who are very depressed, and you see some who have very little money and very grateful, very happy. Some of the countries around the world, I think Mexico, Costa Rica, some of the places where people are super excited, they're super happy. They don't have much, but family is a big thing, and that's what brings them joy in life.
So you said you went to Kuwait. Was there other countries that you were deployed to that were maybe you didn't see that such of an aggressive to violence?
So Kuwait 2003, then we get into Iraq, and then I get a little bit of a break. Then 2010, I'm in Afghanistan, so that was 9 months. And then back to Kuwait again in 2016, so that was different. I was a budget officer in charge of almost $1 billion, but it was different, it was weird being there because I was so used to, when you deploy, you always think, I've got to have a body armor, a weapon, and just be on the lookout. And I remember the first time we went out the compound and we went downtown Kuwait, I was super nervous because I was not used to that, but it was mentally, it was the toughest deployment because of the working a lot of hours, 8 in the morning till sometimes 8 or midnight at night, because when, with the time change, you have your headquarters back in South Carolina. And when it's time to go to bed or when it's time to leave work around 5, 6 o'clock Kuwait times, they're getting up, they have their coffee, and they're, sending you work to do. And you're like, come on, we've been up already for a while. But that was the one deployment where I didn't have to worry about my life too much. But, you're still an American soldier. You go out in Kuwait City, you wear civilian clothes, but you still have to be very careful, just because some people may know that you're a U.S. soldier. You're driving in regular vehicles, SUVs and things like that, and blending in, but you still want to make sure that you are careful. So that was Kuwait was the one deployment where I didn't really have to worry about my life. So, but Iraq, Afghanistan, that was a constant, on a daily basis. You're always worried just because you're out there, you're in the combat zone. And you asked earlier, when you're in a combat zone, are you at threat just when you get out when you're there, you land there, you're always at, anything could happen to you once you're in that combat zone. So regardless of whether you get out the compound or not. So because the insurgents were constantly trying to get us, regardless of whether you're female, male, they don't care. You're an American soldier, and they want to take you out. So
And just kind of to end it right there, but just a quick question.
yes.
Would you ever see like kids, like underage kids, like with weapons shooting at you guys?
I never saw that. I never saw that. Again, like I always say, I'm very blessed that I didn't see things like that. I remember till this day. I remember I was about 25, 26 when I went to Iraq, and I still remember this 18-year-old. He was a tanker, and I remember his eyes were almost glazed out because I was actually getting out of Iraq, and the kid, he was shooting people at this distance. Imagine that at 18 years old, you have to, because they're trying to get on top of the tank, and you have to take them out because it's your life or their life. So I always tell people I'm blessed that I didn't have to do that because, when you're there, your only mission is to get back home. At the time I was married, I had a daughter who was 2 years old. So that was the goal, to get back home. That was my why. Is I have to get back home to my daughter and my ex-wife at the time, when I'm no longer married. But so I always say I was very blessed not to have done any of that. So.
And you mentioned earlier you managed more than $1 billion for the U.S. Army, like their budget.
Yeah.
So what was that like?
That was the toughest job I've ever had in my life. I tell you what, there are still days I have nightmares about it, and I get up and I ask myself, how did I accomplish that? You're in Kuwait and you are in charge of a 4-star command. Basically, you have a 4-star general, and I have his checkbook, and I have to make sure that contracts are funded, all over the central command. We're talking all kind of countries where we're currently at. We're currently in conflict in some of those parts of the world, and it was very stressful because every move I make is on me. It's making sure that the funding is going to the right places. We're calling the right people. It's the most stressful job mentally, just because there's a lot of pressure. You fail, you have a 2-star general barking down your neck. The 4-star general is barking down his neck, and so there was no room for error. It's one thing about the military is it really pushes you, and you quickly find out what you're capable of doing. A lot of us always say we have a lot of limiting beliefs in life. Sometimes we think we can't do something, but when you're in a situation where you have to perform, you'll be surprised what you're capable of doing. So it's yes, it was very challenging, but because of that, it's I feel like anything is possible. Especially in this country. This is a country that creates about 1,200 new millionaires per day. Those were the stats in 2025. So, I always tell people this is a country where you can accomplish anything. So, and helping a lot of people is what I'm very passionate about doing, especially after the military. So,
and you this whole budget? Are you doing it by yourself, or do you have a team behind you?
So the company that I'm actually, so I have an agency, NSC Financial Group. That's my agency. Basically, it's a legacy I like to leave for my daughters. I always tell people my why is my daughters are my why. Nina, Sophia, Eva, NSC Financial Group. Their first initials are their first names, and I'm actually under a big company called Five Rings Financial. The CEO is actually a graduate of KU back in the 70s. Great person. He loves to help people. And so all the admin work and everything is done, in Denver. That's where our headquarters is at. But my agency, I'm constantly trying to recruit people. For example, this coming Monday, our CEO will be in Overland Park, and we're inviting folks who are interested in helping other people, with their money. And so I have a small team, but I'm really growing. I'm trying to get more people, especially young people, because when you're young, when we first met, I told you have a major advantage because you're 24 years old and you have like 40 plus years ahead of you because of, there's the most powerful tool in financial industry is compound interest. A lot of people don't understand it. And if you use it wisely, you can slowly grow your money in 40 years and be surprised where you're at the end of those 40 years. So, but yeah, I'm always looking for people, always recruiting. Every time I see someone, I just ask them, what they do, and if they want a part-time opportunity, I'm obviously 100% commission. So, it's anytime I bring on somebody, they must have a job, because this is a side career that they would work on. It takes time, and at the same time, they can really help people with their money. So, but I'm very passionate about it. So,
And you mentioned earlier about compound
interest, yes,
compound interest, and the more
yeah,
time you're in it, the
yes,
better.
yes.
Did you have these rules, or like were they telling you about this stuff when you were growing up?
No, that's the thing. So I love to. We Five Rings Financial, the company, does Money 101, where it's a workshop where we educate people about growing the money and protecting the money. And compound interest is one of those things that you've heard of it, but you don't really know how powerful it is. And I love to use myself as an example because I always make fun of myself. I say I'm overeducated. I have a degree in economics. I have a master's in business administration. Yet when I attended the first Money 101 almost 5 years ago, I didn't want to go at first because I thought I knew everything about money. I've read the book by Tony Robbins, Master of the Game. I've read a lot of book about money, and you're always thinking, okay, well, I know everything about money. But once I attended the Money 101, I was really shocked that I didn't know a lot of these things. And so that's why we constantly invite people to these events. We hold one once a month in Overland Park. There's one in Wichita, Kansas. There's one in Manhattan, Kansas. I'm hoping to eventually have enough people and recruits so that we can actually hold one in Lawrence, Kansas. But compound interest, it was something that I didn't really know much about. There are a lot of, I'll teach you something like very simple right now. It's called the Rule of 72. You don't even need a calculator to be able to figure this out. But the Rule of 72 basically states, if you have 1% interest rate, and it will go into 72 times. So basically, it will take your money. If you had $1, it would take 72 years for the money to double. So we always advise people not to put your money in a place like most banks won't even give you 1%. Because if you had $1 at a bank, it's going to take you more than 72 years for your dollar to double. So now if you have a 10% interest rate, you take that 10% into 72, that's about 7.2 years. So your dollar is going to double every 7.2 years. So that's pretty much the Rule of 72. So when you look at an interest rate, you can just quickly kind of determine, okay, if I have $1,000 at 10% or whatever, 1%, you'll be able to tell approximately where it should be. So that's the Rule of 72. And it's a very powerful, compound interest is the most powerful, like I said earlier, it's the most powerful tool in the financial industry. And most people don't understand it. For example, if you have a credit card at 29%, that into 72, I think if my math is correct, is about 2.5 years. So if you have $10,000 every 2.5 years, if you barely paid it, that's going to double. So compound interest can help you or hurt you. So it really depends on how you use it.
And in your workshops, and do you ever like encounter people who are in kind of that like mess where they use the credit card and that 29% starts to add up year after year? Have you seen that a lot?
Yes, we do. Unfortunately, I think, we're a country of consumers. We love to consume. We love to buy, especially the average American. The average American loves to consume because people want to show others that they have, I guess, money. We want the nice cars and we want the nice clothes or whatever, and a lot of people put themselves in debt because they're trying to prove to others that they have money. And then when you look at some of the richest people in this country, they don't do that. It's I'll use, for example, Gucci purses. Those are bought by most average Americans, who want to show others that they have money. Well, what the rich love to do, this is a lesson all my 3 daughters know is, there's a book called The Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I'm not sure if you've heard of that book, Robert Kiyosaki. First time I read that book, I understood what assets and liabilities were. So I always ask my daughters, what's the difference between assets and liabilities? And their response, because after I taught them, is that assets put money in your pockets, liabilities take money out of your pocket. So a lot of Americans spend a lot of money on liabilities. Most people think that the house that they live in is an asset. Well, think about it. You're paying the mortgage every single month. If you have a rental property and somebody's renting it and it's paying itself off and you're making a little bit of money going into your pocket, that's an asset. So wealthy people, that's where they love to invest their money. So you're 24, for example, instead of spending 30% of your money, like buying Air Jordans or whatever you like to buy, so you're telling yourself, yeah, I'm going to stack my money away. And then once I start finding some assets like stocks or bonds, whatever, real estate, whatever, like this podcast that you're doing, is maybe you want to invest money into that so that it could actually bring money and then pay for your lifestyle. Well, the average American does it the other way, the W-2, and they want to buy all those things. And so that's really, it's kind of important. A lot of Americans, they just, they put themselves into a lot of trouble with credit cards. And, myself too, I've been there. I'm not perfect. We all have done that. It's, especially before I understood a lot of this stuff, it's, but now that I understand it a lot better, you really realize where you should be putting your money. And if you, again, if you have a credit cards at 29% and you have an investment account giving you 5%, get rid of the credit card stuff real fast, because that, once you understand the rule of 72, you see how quickly that consumer debt's not bad. If it's consumer debt, like buying clothes, buying boats, just things that don't bring you money, that's considered bad debt. But when it's debt that you use to invest into properties, into a business, and it's going to bring you money, that's totally different. But most Americans get debt, just to buy things. So a lot of consumer debt. So, yep, I see that a lot.
And do you think like American society has conditioned people over time to think that way? Or do you think it's just something that, I don't know, it's like already like been implemented in American culture?
I think so. It's interesting. When I first moved to America, it was really surprising, that to see that a lot of people have cars, where I'm from, the loans don't exist. So my father he was well off. He was the 1%. So, you buy the cars cash. But in America, once I got to America, I realized, well, everybody can buy Levi's jeans, for example. Everybody can do this. Everybody can do that. And so we love things in this country. We want to go on vacation. We want to do all these things, especially now. I think it's worse with social media because, you're seeing others on Instagram and you're comparing yourself and you see them in Costa Rica or whatever, and then you want to go. And so you put that vacation on a credit card and then you tell yourself, we'll pay it later. But it quickly, because most people just want to pay the minimum, and then your debt just keeps growing and growing. So I think it's in us, Americans, we love to spend money. And that's what runs the economy. Anytime there's, we get money, we just put it out there at the economy. Well, the rich take that money and invest it into something. And that's what I've always thought differently, because I think a lot of that too was, my father was a spender. He was not like me. He loved to spend and to show, but I was totally different. One of my daughters is like that. Actually, prior to this podcast, as I was getting ready to come out here, my youngest daughter was asking for money. And I keep telling her, I say, hey, you've got to learn to save, because every time I send you this little allowance, you're blowing it all, it's like, and then my middle daughter was just like, you'll give her $100 and 6 months later, she hasn't spent it, and so she's a lot like me, and so people say that my daughters make fun of me and say, well, Dad, you're cheap. I say, no, there's a difference. I'm frugal. I don't like to waste money because I want to save money and put it in the things that will bring me back money. And that's how I've always thought, even from the time I was at KU. And, when I became an officer, my first goal, I was about 28 years old. My first goal was to rent a house, which is still a rental property till this day. I've had that. It was my first property in 2008 that I bought, and it's still bringing me money. It's still building equity. But those were the things that, I don't know, I didn't really learn that from my father. I think I just really started exploring and seeing what wealthy people do. So
kind of bouncing off of that.
Yeah.
You said your father was a spender because normally, like in immigrant families, I know in mine, like it's always like when you're growing up, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a lawyer or something, a career that earns you a lot.
Yes.
And they're like, you got to save money and you can't spend on this.
Right.
So, hey, here's like on your family, like it wasn't really that way.
It was, it's my father wanted me to be an engineer. He had a PhD in chemical engineer and chemistry at high school. I went to Newton High and I barely passed that class. I was like, there is no way I'm doing chemical engineering. One of my brothers, he's my third brother. He lives in Topeka. He graduated from K-State and he got a degree in engineering. But yes, it's you're right about that. Immigrant families, it's all about education. The African population in America is, by the way, we have the most degrees. Look at me, for example. I have a degree in economics. I have a master's degree. My sister's got a master's degree too, and she's a nurse, and she wants to work on a second one. And I tell her, hey, there's nothing wrong with education. I look at education as a foundation. When you look at your house, it's a foundation. It's good to have it, but it doesn't mean that it's going to open a lot of opportunities out there. But a lot of immigrant families, that's how the goal was to come to America, get a degree, and get that education, because some of the best universities in the world are here. But the flashing thing, I think, is pretty common in a lot of immigrant families, because it's the idea that I have to show others that I'm doing well. My house is big, my car is flashy, and things like that. But I learned that from my father, because when his business started struggling, I remember being 13 years old and saying, hey, Dad, you should look at other opportunities. He's like, oh, no, we'll be fine, and then he pretty much, lost it all and had to start over again. And you learn from that, when you see something like that happen, and you quickly realize, okay, I got to make sure and do something with my money. But I didn't know what to do with my money for a long time. I just saved it, and put it. A lot of it was put in accounts where I wasn't even earning 1%, But so once I started finding out about this more than almost, like I said, my first Money 101 almost 5 years ago, that's when I realized, wow, it's amazing, where you can put your money and where it can actually grow and things of that. So, yeah.
So kind of to go off of that, do you think people right now, they're more like they have a fear of investing their money because they think they're going to lose it? Or do you think it's because they're uneducated and maybe they haven't been educated on financial stuff like that, like those topics?
I think people have a fear. It depends on your age. You're 24 years old. You have plenty of time. You can take a lot of risk. And if things don't work out, you have time to recover. But imagine being, let's say, 58 years old, and your plan is to retire at the age of 65. And you're not sure where to put your money. Because most Americans are unsure, where to put the money. It's the stock market or the bank. Well, as we discussed earlier, you put it at the bank. Inflation is actually over 3% right now. So if you're not getting 1%, you're losing money. Your dollar, your $1 does not have the same value it had a year ago. And so people are just afraid because, when you look at the market, 1929, you look at 2000, the .com, you look at 2008, you look at 2022, and then you look at COVID, 2020, people lost a lot of money. So people are they're a little nervous and skeptical on where to put the money. And so and a lot of it too is just because they're not educated, because they don't know. Like I say, I thought I was educated. I didn't know where I could put money. I didn't know that there were other options where you could put your money and not ever lose a dime. The first time I attended the Money 101, I heard that. I was like, it's impossible. There's no way you could put money somewhere and not lose a dime. I didn't think it was possible, but it is possible. If you, I'm sure you probably know who Warren Buffett is, is the greatest investor. You would say the greatest investor of all time. And I love his rule. He has two rules. Rule 1, don't lose money. Rule 2, I'll look back at rule 1. And I love that rule, because I don't like to lose money. I hate it. I mean, I've always enjoyed, actually, as I was younger, I spent more time watching my money grow. And my debt was also growing, but instead of paying off that debt real fast, I didn't understand that compound interest could actually, really make that consumer debt grow a lot. So instead of, but I really enjoy watching my other investments. Like, a lot of it was in the military 401k and just seeing it, I would get all excited because it's growing and all that. But I think a lot of Americans have a fear, just because we're uncertain of what could happen, tomorrow, what could happen to the economy. Like I said, it all really depends on your age. You're 60 years old and you're planning on retiring in 5 years. And right when you start getting your retirement, the market goes down. Now what? And oh, by the way, most Americans, during COVID 2020, they found out that most Americans didn't even have, I think if I'm correct, about $400 into the savings account, because a lot of people, again, they just spend their money. They don't ever, when I was your age, I didn't think about where I would be today, 53, or in 10 years, I'll be 63, but I was different. I was a bit different because I always had goals at every once I turned 30, I had a goal. Once I turned 40, I had a goal. 50, I had a goal. I have a goal for 60. One of those goals would be to be able to give back, to be able to give back. So I really want to work as hard as I can because I love to help and give back to those, especially because I'm grateful to be in the position that I'm in. You know, I love to have eventually be able to give back so people from my part of the world could have the opportunity to come to America and study maybe. So just finding ways of giving back, you know, but I think education is very important, you know, because again, you don't know what you don't know. You know, it's if you you know, and then nowadays, of course, it's easier to get educated. You have YouTube, you have podcasts, you have all kind of information. But I think most people sometimes they're just nervous because they don't think there's a solution out there. You know, a lot of times when I invite people to a Money 101, number one, they think we're going to sell them something. We don't. We just educate and they get a free meal. But people, and then sometimes I think people don't want to deal with it. You know that you have and I've been there. I have credit cards and I'm supposed to pay it. I don't want to pay them, you know, and so you don't want to deal with it. And so I think it's just, and we're the wealthiest country in the world, you know, but when you're not educated about certain things, it's hard to, you know, to do well. It's just like yourself with the podcast, you know, it's a skill that you have, you know, and this skill here that you're building is going to be better than what you learned in college. College is good. It's a good foundation, but you look at Stephen Bartlett, you know, we were just talking about that before we started this podcast, the Dayo CEO. It's amazing to see where he's at today just because of his skill, you know. And if you can question, your skill is asking the right questions and, you know, you're doing an awesome job with it. And so that's what really will help you grow a business and things like that. Yeah. So hopefully I answered that question. Sometimes I go on and on, but I just passionate about money and helping people and stuff like that.
No, this is great.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you too, what big differences do you see between, say, rich and poor people? Like, is there certain habits, or is it just because of the amount that money that they're making? Because I know I've heard stories where even janitors have invested and they've been millionaires when they retire.
Yes.
So is it a money problem, a earning problem, or is it a habit problem?
I think the first thing, you know, one of our top agents, you know, our company, we train a lot because you always want to, okay, I'll use Patrick Mahomes, you know, we're in Kansas here, Chiefs. I know folks don't think the Chiefs are going to do well, but they're going to do well. But, you know, if you watch Patrick Mahomes, he's good at one thing, is delivering that ball to that receiver or that running back. And he just keeps working and working on that. And I think the one thing is one of the guys that was at one of our trainings in Colorado, he asked a question. He asked the same exact question that you just asked me. What do you think makes a difference between the rich and the poor? And I said, habit. And he asked me, what kind of habits? And I was like, good habits, you know, like maybe not watching a lot of TV. And then he goes, all of y'all are wrong. Belief is the number one. You have to believe that something is possible, because you could have the best habits. You read every single day. You have the best degrees and all that. But if you don't believe that something is possible, I don't think that you can make it. And I think that's why, you know, the Forbes 400 list, the 400 the richest people in America, their wealth is about 80, I think somewhere a little bit over 80% of the wealth in this country. And I think the reason they are there, it's not because they're special, you know, I think it's just because they believe in themselves, you know, they invest in themselves. And of course, then you have those other habits too, like, you know, where they spend their time. You and I, we both have 24 hours in a day. What are you doing with your 24 hours? Are you watching TV all day, or are you trying to work on something that's going to help a lot of other people? I think also, you know, they just have a passion for what they do and they want to help. I think especially if you want to help a lot of people, you can do very well. You know, it's because most of the people that have money in this country, like you mentioned about that janitor who's been putting money away for a long time. There's a very good book called The Millionaire Next Door. I highly recommend that book, because in America, we think being rich is Travis Kelce, you know, Jason Kelce, Patrick Mahomes. But most of those rich people, most of the millionaire next door, you would never know the millionaire. They have, regular house and they drive a regular car. They invested into their business, into themselves. One of the things that at Five Rings Financial we do, we invest in ourselves. Because if you don't believe anything is possible, I don't think you could actually accomplish it. And the military is the same way. I'm big into self-help, and the military does a lot of brainwashing, and it's positive brainwashing, making you believe that anything is possible. For example, I don't like heights. I have a fear for heights. I don't know what happened, but when I was younger, I could get on top of a roof, no issues. But once I got in the military, I wanted to go to airborne school so you could jump out of planes. And I asked the instructor, how you get rid of the fear of heights? And he said, you don't. I said, okay, have a good day. I was out of there. But, but I have accomplished things where I was way up there on top of towers. And it's also because I just believe and the belief, but then also the why, because you have a 2-year-old daughter who's currently 26 right now. And I wanted one day for her to look up to me and say, Dad did these things and all that, set that example for her and for my other daughters. But I think belief and your why, having a strong why, why are you doing this podcast? Because you want to interview people, find out about people, and get the word out there. So I think the habits are important, but if you don't believe, I don't think you'll succeed. I really believe that, because it's amazing what you can accomplish if you really believe in yourself and forget everybody. Because a lot of times I don't even share my goals to anybody, because most humans, they, especially if they're not trying, they don't want you to do well, succeed. And when you tell them what you're going to do, they always find a way to discourage you. And, but forget the rest, just stay focused and go for that goal.
Do you think that is one of the biggest impacts as well? Like people telling their goals to other people and being discouraged by it?
I think sometimes, yeah. I think sometimes because unless you find that mastermind group, whenever we're in training with the company Five Rings Financial, it's amazing to be in a room of 100 or 1,200 people who have the same mindset, who listen to the same people, like Jim Rome, for example. You're probably too young to know who he is, but you could also Google. But those folks they really believe anything is possible, And I think it's just that a lot of times it can be your environment. Maybe you grew up in an area where most people, this is what they do. You graduate from high school and you go work at a factory, and that's what you believe. But then you're different because you believe that something else is possible. I don't want to do what Dad did and Grandpa did. I want to do this, because I believe that's possible. And I think a lot of times, yeah, people want to destroy your goals because that makes them feel better. You know what I'm saying? It's like, why would I encourage you to be better than me? You probably heard this where they say you are the average of the 5 people you hang around. So if you want to be successful in whatever you're doing, you need to be around people who have bigger podcasts than you. I always tell people, it's like, one of the things I'm trying to work on is playing golf. My golf game sucks. But I need to play with people who are better than me. I'm pretty good at sports. I love playing soccer, basketball, things that I've always wanted to play against people who are better than me so I could be better. I could push myself. And so I think a lot of people, sometimes they just don't want to encourage you because they're not doing much. And so they don't want to see you succeed. And not everybody. Some want to, but it's just, I think a lot of people just don't believe things are possible. It's like I said earlier, you think about it, it is harder to climb Mount Everest than to become a millionaire. The first time I saw that fact, I was like, wow, because I am not trying to climb Mount Everest. The number of people who've actually not made it, especially on the way down, it's like, so, and you just have to put that in your head and just believe that anything is possible. When I joined the military, there were things I wanted to accomplish, and I told myself, regardless of what happened, I'm going to accomplish these things. But the military does a really, really good job pushing you, making you believe in that. And so I think it's just a lot of people, and there's nothing wrong if you don't want to more in your life or help more people. Nothing wrong with that. It's not for everybody. That's why they always say, an entrepreneur, most people can't be entrepreneurs. Probably 9% or less could be that, because it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. It's not easy. You gotta risk a lot. And sometimes things won't happen, but that's okay, because I believe that every time you fail, you get closer to your goal. So, yeah.
And talking about sharing your goals, was there ever a time where you shared your goals to, say, your family or friends, and they were kind of like
Yeah,
discouraging?
There were times,
discouraging you?
my time in the military, when I told them, some people, that what I wanted to do, they didn't believe me. They thought that, oh no, you're not going to. But I'm one of those people. I love to hear no or negative feedback. It pushes me. Well, you have other people, when they hear that negative feedback, they just crumble. But actually, when you tell me I can't do something, now I really want to prove it to you. And so, yeah, I dealt with that, especially because I didn't understand the military, and I wanted to do certain things, and I was made fun of. I was told that, no, that's not possible. You're not going to be able to do that. But that's okay. It's I think a lot of that too was being raised by a father who instilled that in me. Believe in yourself, regardless of what others say. And I think if you have that person who's a strong father figure, or whoever, that pushes you. And I love to be pushed, because I'm still young, man. I mean, I've got plenty more years, and I love to do much more, and explore more of the world, and help as many people as I can with their money. And so I believe that, there's a lot of things that I can accomplish. So, yeah.
And where would you say, like, what? Because I know right now the American, like the white culture,
Mm-hmm.
especially, like, they're well off.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think in like these other communities, they know less about the financial education? Is why you don't see as many like people of color in like those positions?
I think sometimes too. Yep. I think it could be education could be a reason. Yeah. I think education is important. I think a lot of times too. Sometimes maybe in other cultures. Sometimes it depends on what culture you're looking at. You'll see some cultures where they've always done things this way, and so that's why they do those things. I think also, like, just based off the research, a lot of the research I've done is also ownership. Like, you'll see more white families owning homes. Of course, of the history of this country in America, there's been times where if you looked different, you couldn't own homes. And so that set people back a little bit too. But I believe that, owning helps, because it increases your net worth. If you own a home, it's better to have something than nothing. And so, but education is the big key. But I think also it's not just your typical education like college, self-educate, because learning a skill, finding out what you're good at and seeing if you can help people with that. And so I think, one of my goals also, I would love to be able to get into those communities where they don't have as many opportunities, and see how I can help. It's one of my goals. In our organization, we have a big population of folks from Brazil. They call themselves the Brazilianaires, because when they come to America, they're in Boca Raton, Florida. They have two options. The men do construction and the women clean homes. Well, because of Mike's company, Five Rings Financial, he has given a lot of opportunities to these Brazilian folks where they're helping each other with money and growing their teams. And now they're the wealthiest immigrant, population in America. So to me, that's exciting. The first time I entered the room, and I think there was about 1,200 people in the room, and half of them were from Brazil. I wish I could speak Portuguese. I speak French, but Portuguese is like a really hard language to understand, for me at least, because I was trying to listen, but it was so exciting to see that group of folks excited, because I live the same dream that they live, because people think the American dream is dead. And if you look at that group of folks from Brazil, and they're doing very well for themselves and helping a lot of people, yes, the American dream is still alive. I think some people believe it's dead because maybe they stop believing, again. And so I think it's just finding what you can do and help others, in your community. So
You talked about at your company NSE, you guys are trying to help the younger folks get into financial education. So what are you guys doing? Like, what's the the game plan that you guys have set out to do that?
Yeah. So really, one of the things we do, one of the things we're really known for is education. We, like I mentioned earlier, we hold these workshops where you come and you receive education from our top agents. We have our CEO. He actually comes. He's investing a lot of time in the Midwest because he has representation all over the United States, but the Midwest, he wants to really invest the time in there. And we are looking for people who are younger because the industry, in the financial service industry, most folks are a bit older. They've been around for a minute, and we are looking for younger folks. And, when you come and join our team, you're not going to know everything, but we always ask, when I meet somebody, I say, hey, you think you can invite somebody to free dinner and education? And if you can do that, okay, that's a start. And little by little, you'll have a mentor who we call the field trainers who will actually train you and learn the business. Where if you, for example, came on the team and you tell me that you know people who need help, I walk with you, you set up the appointments, I show up, I do all the work. All you do is you're basically in training. I do all the work and you make 50% of what I make and that's the way we actually teach and learn. We feel like the best way to learn is through watching and learning and training and actually being out there with the field trainer. So that is one thing that that separates us from a lot of companies, because a lot of other companies, you get licensed and then they say, hey, Saul, by the way, good luck, congratulations, go out there and get him. And people realize, well, yesterday you were doing, I don't know what job, but maybe you were doing Uber and delivering pizza, and today you're supposed to help me with my money. Well, that doesn't work really well, and that's why most people leave the industry, because of they're just put out there by themselves. Instead of like going out to the people that and say, hey, I know somebody who, by the way, who was in the military, he was a finance officer, he managed a lot of money for the military, and he does this today. Would you guys be interested in hearing what he has to say? And so, when we go and meet with somebody, all we do is ask questions. We just want to find out where you're at and where you're trying to go. And we feel like having some young folks is very beneficial, because you guys, I don't know what the future will be like, in 40 years. I don't know if Social Security will be there, Medicare. These things are very costly. And so you've got to find ways to, make sure and secure the future. Yep. So because it's coming, there's two things you can't avoid. They always say taxes and death. You can't avoid those two things regardless. So you're going to have to pay taxes, and one day we all have to leave this world. So you might as well plan so that you can have when you're ready to retire, you can actually have a great time and see the world, do whatever things that you like to do, so.
Do you think that younger people right now will have to work at least, I don't know, 2 times harder than, say, the generation before, just because of how costly things are right now, and the opportunities are kind of like limited right now?
Yes, it's really tough. And when I got out of college, I had a hard time finding a job. That was back in I graduated in '96 from KU. It was tough back then, but it's also tougher now because homes are a lot more expensive. Inflation is up. And education is also up. You're seeing a lot of students out there with student loans that they're having a hard time paying. And it seems like, the one thing about your generation is that you guys you're not trying to just do the traditional thing. You're also looking at other things like podcasts or, Instagram influencers. You're seeing where you guys have an opportunity that I didn't have. If you wanted to make extra money during my time, you did the pizza delivery or whatever, but things are a little bit different right now, where if you have a skill set and you're good at it and you just invest your time in it, you could do so well that you have a very good life, and but I always tell people, I say, have a job, because, and it's not easy. Your generation is not easy because things are getting a lot more expensive. Home ownership, I think, is going to be a lot tougher too, because home prices are just going up, and then you have those private equity companies buying some of these homes, and then and also rent is also getting a lot more expensive, because they also realize, well, if you can't buy, you have to rent. Now we're going to increase the prices of rent. So it's tough, but I think I'm a very positive person. I always focus on positivity. I don't focus on negative. I always tell myself that things are going to normalize. When you look at the history of the world and economics, you always have your ups and you have your downs, but I think you just have to stay positive, because if you just focus on the things that you can't control, it just makes it tougher on life. But yeah, your generation is it's really interesting because a lot of folks have a hard time getting a job, and I thought it was hard when I graduated, and it's tougher now because it's a lot more expensive to acquire a home and other things. Yeah.
And you said you struggled with finding a job right after you graduated.
Mhm.
Did you have kind of like a anxious like mindset, like, oh, I need to get a job, or like, what am I gonna do? Like, what is the future?
I was not,
hold?
man. I was not ready to leave college. I tell you what, those 4.5 years at KU, even when I drive around campus and walk on campus, best years, some of the best years of my life. I really enjoyed being a Jayhawk, and life is good when you're a college student. The worst thing is final exams and midterm and things like that, but that's nothing compared to like having a job and going to see a boss that you don't like. And so I was not ready to get out of college. I did not want to leave Lawrence. I still wanted to be a college student, but I didn't like the exams and all that. So, but it took me time just looking and all that. But it was just tough. I think the economy was doing okay, but it's not easy. A lot of times when you look at college students, it depends on what degree you get. If you have an engineering degree, you went to law school, med school, nurses, things like that. Yeah, they're the ones who get the job. But, you study business, English, history, whatever. You're in that same pool of people who are all competing for those same jobs. And so I think that was part of the problem too. You have a lot of us competing for the same job and you can't really find anything. And so that was also a reason why I joined the military, because I pretty much ran out of savings and I had to find something to do. And as I mentioned earlier, it was 20 years, you get a retirement, but at the same time, we're like, well, they'll give me a job, they'll teach me skills and things like that. Why not? Why not do it? And when I went to one of the schools after Iraq, I went to Georgia for officer candidate school. I remember the sergeant asking, how come there's so many of you guys in here with college degrees? Well, we can't. We're having a hard time finding jobs, and we know that the Army will give us a job, so that's why we were all there. So it was tough, but it's not I don't think it's as tough as what it is for you guys today. But I really admire your generation too, because when I found out that you were doing the podcast thing, I was like, well, that's pretty awesome, because, it's you're creating your own opportunities instead of just relying on what the market has to offer. And, they always say, if you become really good at what you do, you'll get paid a lot more than somebody else who's probably interviewing just somebody at a HR position or whatever. So I also see pros and cons where you have a lot more opportunities because of the internet. For us, the internet was like really amazing. I grew up watching and seeing what the internet could do. For you all, your generation, it's just normal. It's kind of like it's just it's hard to kind of explain what it's like, but I think sometimes some see the advantage and some don't really see the advantage of it. But if you see the advantage of what the internet provides, yes, it's amazing, because you have a podcast and people can hear you and listen to you halfway across the world. I mean, and then you get a lot of views, and YouTube is paying people for being influencers. It's crazy for me to see that, because like I said earlier, back in my time, you delivered pizza. That's all you could do.
Mm-hmm.
You can get the word out there so fast. Today, if you want to have a party, you just put it on Instagram and push it out there, and you reach 1,000 people. We had to actually go to get things printed and hand them out to people and all that. So yeah, it's totally different. So the pros and cons.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So,
and to kind of finish it off,
yeah,
what would be 3 actionable steps that you would give people who want to either be educated financially or want to take the first steps to go that way? If they're in debt, or they have a lot of, I don't know, maybe they spend a lot of their money on things that they shouldn't. What would be like 3 steps that they could take right now to go that path? Yeah,
I think the first step is always pay. Whenever I tell people to save, they look at me funny. I always and I always say, hey, you're gonna pay your car insurance, you're gonna pay your rent and other things or whatever, but why aren't you paying yourself first? Because your future self will thank you. So I think the first step is always have an emergency account. It's you want to make sure that if something happens, you have a job, but you want to build an emergency account. Typically, they say 3 to 6 months of your income. Build that, and then once you set that up, step 2 would be, okay, now you're looking at, and oh, by the way, make sure that you don't have any credit card debts. If you do, get rid of that stuff, But then step 2 would be looking at, okay, how can I grow my money? Where can I put my money? And that's where we, and anybody can help you grow money. It's not just what I do, but there's plenty of advisors out there that could help you grow money. And so, and that would be like step 2 is growing your money. And then for some people, they want to buy assets, like invest into real estate or invest into a company or whatever, and then step 3 is just, I would say, just keep on working on the skills. Keep on working on the skills that try to be 1% better every day. There's a good book called the Atomic Habits. I highly recommend that book. But the idea, we all kind of focus on goals. Okay, here's my goal. I want to be number 1 in my class, whatever. But what are the steps you have to take every single day in order to reach that goal? And so we kind of forget that there are steps, just because you say, I want to be the number 1 podcast in the world. Well, there are plenty of steps you're going to have to take. You got to keep working on certain things to get there and all that. But I think it's really, that's what I would say, just pay yourself, take care of yourself, because time flies, and then you don't want to lose 40 years. The average American starts planning for retirement at the age of 53. I'm about to be 53 this week. And when I sit down with people my age, they want to be here ready for retirement, but they haven't started. And I tell them, I said, you're going to have to put a lot of money every single month in order to just reach that goal. And when they hear that, they're not happy. I was like, well, that's why we educate people, through our workshops, to make sure that the sooner you start, the better, because you have a major advantage, and for parents who have little newborns, some of the wealthy people, when their kids are born, they start putting money away for them. Because think about it. By the time they turn 53 my age, they have 53 years that they took advantage of compound interest, but it's not that hard. And there's also another book that's good. I read The Automatic Millionaire. And the idea was that, because we're bad at doing certain things, so make it automatic. Like have maybe 10 or 20% of your paycheck drawn and put somewhere else. Make it automatic so you don't have to think about it, so you can just forget it. So find ways to make it easy, and I think because some people will stand there and say, well, I'm going to do this manually. No, you're not. You're going to do it 3 times and then you're going to quit. So just make it automatic, and just, it's just like brushing your teeth. Every day when you wake up, you brush your teeth, so just make it simple, and that's the thing. I think people just always believe that you have to have a lot to save, but you don't. We have a concept where we say, hey, could you save $5 a day? So it's $150 a month. If you could do that for 40 years at 10% interest, you would be a millionaire, but people think that's boring. Well, it's a lot better than getting there and having something, than saying, well, no, I'm just going to wait and figure it out. And by the time I get there, then it'll be too late. And then, it's, you got to keep working. So, and you want to enjoy life. There's nothing wrong with, like me, I'll probably never retire. I retire from the military. I get a paycheck for life, but I want to do things because I stayed at home for 1 year and I drove my wife crazy, and I drove myself crazy, and I had to get out there and find something. And when I found this, I told myself I should have done this the whole time, and so I'm really passionate about helping people with money. So hopefully that answers the question. Yep. So
No, it did very well.
Yeah.
Was there anything that I didn't ask that maybe you want to say before?
I can't think of anything else. I think it's really impressive to see someone your age. You're 24 years old and doing what you're doing now. It's you're inspiring others. To believe in themselves, because when I first met you and you told me you had your own podcast, I was like, wow, that's pretty impressive. So I just want to thank you for bringing me on here, and then just encourage you not to give up. Just keep going, because if you stop, you'll never know. And then the one thing about me, I don't regret anything in the past because I failed at a lot of things, but it doesn't matter because it kept pushing me to get there. And I see a lot of potential in you because your questions, man, you're good at it. And part of my job, what I do when I sit down with people is just asking questions. And you're really good at asking the questions. So just keep it up, man. You'll get there, and then one day you'll be the one. I won't be able to talk to you because you'll be so big. But no. But anyways, no, I see a bright future in you. So I encourage you to just keep doing your thing. Yeah, and don't listen to those who tell you that it's not possible. Just believe in yourself and keep going for it. Yeah. So, but I appreciate you having me on here. So
I
thank
appreciate you,
Yeah.
Oz. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
If people want to find you and the work that you do, where
Yes.
can they go?
So
find
it's
you?
nscfinancialgroup.com. That's my website. And then they can also, if they want to call or text me, it's 913-210-6686. That's the phone number. Best way to reach me is probably through a text. But then you have at NSC Financial Group. At NSC Financial Group, that's my Instagram. Try to post educational things every few days, a week. And so that's the way they can find me. So
Yeah, that's awesome. And
Yeah.
we'll put a link down below on the description so
Yes.
you guys can go and find Oz and learn more about the work that he does and educating the younger generation.
All
Thank
right.
you, Oz, for joining
Thank
the
you.
show.
Rock Chalk, man. Thanks for having me on.
Thank
Yep.
you.
Thank you.